What do you think about the Laker team now?
You follow the box scores of the games every day? Just the Lakers.
You're kidding. That is really a compliment. I was pleased to see you smile at the top of our show because once the game starts, you have a game face. You don't smile much out there.
I don't think you have to do things for money anymore.
Correct.
What's up, Laker fans? Welcome to Laker Film Room Podcast. I'm Pete, joined as always by Darius. The Lakers have begun the season 2-5. They've had quite a few close and frustrating losses. And Monday night was a night where Laker fans were about as frustrated as I've seen them in a while. There's obviously expectations that come with having a team like this and having LeBron James on your team. And for the first time, Laker fans, in a long time anyway, they are irritated with how things are going. And I count me as one of them. Darius, you have an interesting idea of kind of like what a core tenet or a foundation of what Luke should be doing going forward that we spoke about offline. Can you share that with our listeners?
Yeah, and I actually wrote about it today at Forum Blue and Gold. I just think that Luke needs to figure out his rotation. My thoughts about feeling out the rotation is that Luke needs to make a determination on who are the 6 and maybe 7 players who he really trusts as these are sort of my quote-unquote starting caliber players. And I think that these are the guys who he should be looking at as the guys who start games and the guys who finish games. I would tend to lean towards 6 guys. The 6 guys that I would look at are LeBron, Lonzo, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, Kyle Kuzma, and JaVale McGee. I think those are really outside of Rondo not being mentioned there, those 6 guys are really the guys who have started every single game this season. I think that they're really the Lakers' 6 most important players. You know, I guess you can make an argument for Rondo being one of the most important players as well. And I just feel like those 6 core guys are the guys who offer the most versatility on offense and on defense. I think that long term they are the team's most important players outside of like McGee, right, who's on a 1-year minimum deal, and they are the players who the Lakers should be investing in both for this season and beyond. And it just so happens that, like I said, if you drew a Venn diagram of who are the team's most important players this year and the most important players moving forward, these guys are those players, and the Lakers should be playing them.
So the subtext of that is most of those guys have started and finished games. The one place where your comments really stand out to me are Lonzo versus Rondo, right? He did not close the last 2 games, and he played very poorly in both of those games as well. I don't entirely disagree with your point. I also, for me, the only guy on this team that has earned the you close a game no matter how well you played the rest of the game type of title is LeBron. Every other guy on the team, like if they don't have it that night, of which Lonzo did not have it the last 2 nights, I'm totally fine with somebody else finishing that if their backup is playing better than they are. But what you're saying is actually fairly different than that. Do you believe that, like, let's talk Lonzo and Rondo real quick. Do you think that Lonzo's at a point where he should be closing games no matter what?
No matter what, I mean, that's like so much rope, right? Like,
sure, but okay. What is the degree of your rope? Let's be specific. Do you think he should have finished the San Antonio and or Minnesota games?
Yes.
Okay. What's your reasoning on that?
My reasoning is that I actually think that just Lonzo's just the better player. I think that, and so beyond that though, I'm going to get into why I think having a core of players like this is significant to me. I think it sets up into the psychology of the team and what you're building towards and defining roles in a way where you start to get the best out of players and how you can generate and maintain buy-in to specific roles. I think that when you start to jerk around players' roles or you put things up in the air in a way where it's just like, oh, well, whoever has it tonight, they can go ahead and it's going to be their show, right? Outside of LeBron. Because I think that while you could argue that there is this is competition and we want the most competitive team, and if a guy doesn't have it, then the next guy up, maybe who does will have it, he's going to be in the game and you're going to be on the bench and you're going to cheer for him. I think that that's sort of an idea that Luke Walton has promoted. I'm not dogging that idea, but I think that specifically with young players who you are grooming to be the sort of members of the next great team, and I think that that's how this front office looks specifically at a guy like Lonzo Ball and at a guy like Brandon Ingram, specifically those two players, that you need to give them the rope to actually be in those situations and succeed or fail on merit. And then if they fail, you're going to give them an opportunity the next time too. Because I think that the flip side of what Luke is saying is guys start to look over their shoulder a little bit, and I think it takes away from how good they can actually be in those moments when they're actually playing free. Which I think we saw. I actually think we saw this during the 2 games that both Rondo and Brandon Ingram were suspended, when the Lakers rotation was a little bit shortened and the guys who then went into the lineup were guys who inherently knew that they were only going to get like 1 or 2 shifts, and that the burden was then going to fall on like the remaining 6 or 7 guys to be the key players throughout the rest of the game.
Yeah, there was more of a like clear delineation, right?
Yes,
where, like,
there was a hierarchy.
Right, that's it. There's a hierarchy where like a guy like Svi got some run, right? But like Svi knows that there are guys ahead of him on the totem pole, right? Where when everybody's healthy, that becomes even the starting lineup decisions, right? Of putting Ingram in at the 2 and keeping Kuzma in, and because Kuzma had been averaging, 22, 23 points a game alongside LeBron, had played very well, is trying to make everybody happy and maybe not making many people happy at all in those efforts. What did you think of that starting lineup, kind of how as it plays into your broader idea?
No, look, that's a lineup that I had said that I'd like to see. I thought that we
discussed it, yeah.
Yeah, I thought they were mostly fine. I think Kuzma is a natural fit next to LeBron. He's the exact type of forward that you'd want to put next to LeBron, except the defensive deficiencies are real with Kuzma. I think ideally you want a player who has an offensive profile like Kuzma and a defensive profile more in line with like current Brandon Ingram. Not like projecting where you want Brandon Ingram to be, but current Brandon Ingram.
Sure.
Right? Where it's just like, okay, in theory, we could put this guy on a really good wing, or even in some matchups like a lanky sort of like Aminu type power forward, right? And say, okay, LeBron, like you can guard the weaker of whoever those 2 positions are because your forward mate has that guy. And I think what Luke is trying to do is sort of have that with Ingram now at shooting guard rather than Hart, because as you and I have discussed, Hart has certain defensive deficiencies that are still just too prevalent, right? So it's like, I'm not knocking Hart. He does plenty of things defensively well, just other things he does like really below average at this stage of his career.
I would like to see them roll with this lineup for at least the next 5 to 10 games and see what, let everybody get into a groove. Brandon was in foul trouble in that game against Minnesota, so you didn't get a ton of minutes with that lineup. But one thing has been sticking under my craw that I wanted to discuss with you is, you remember I used to complain about the Julius Randle-Larry Nance combo,
yes.
And my specific complaint was that you get none of the benefits of going small, right, of having spacing and shooting, because neither guy was a threat from 3-point range. But you get the detriments of that, right? That's a big lineup that the Lakers are running, right? With Ingram at the 2, Kuz at the 3, LeBron at the 4, or whoever, is playing what position amongst those 3. But they're still so bad on the boards, man. Like, Brandon's not a good rebounder for his size. Kuzma's even worse. And like LeBron is the team's best defensive rebounder, and he cares some of the time. JaVale is an rebounder.
Yes.
Lonzo's supposed to be good, but he's grabbing a board in 24 minutes, right? He's not rebounding the way he did last year. And obviously a lot of this goes back to Brook, and we've discussed the
and
boxing
even
out
Randall.
and things
Like Randall was just a space eater.
Absolutely.
Type of player,
he would,
right? Like
he'd
even
gobble
though Randall was not a box out guy, right?
but he'd go get it.
But
he would go get the ball.
He would go get it. He would keep balls alive. He just was just sort of like a big dude who played with like a wide base a lot of times. So anyways, we're diverging, but
it's important because that's something where you've got this big lineup. You've got great length with Brandon and Kuzma playing either the 3 or the 4. Like whoever your 3 is, whether it's Kuzma or LeBron, that's a big 3 in today's NBA. But they're rebounding so poorly that you're not getting the advantages that you're supposed to get from that. And so that's something to me that's the biggest thing I'll be looking for from that lineup is, can you crash boards effectively on the defensive glass? Because you do lose some foot speed, in trying to get Ingram and Kuzma in the same lineup. You do lose the ability of a guy who can chase guys around screens. Now, Hart is not a great option as a perimeter defender, as you were saying. He can trail guys off of screens, all right? He gets back cut. We've talked about his point of attack defense and all of that. But it's nice having another guard, especially with Lonzo being the type of guy that he is. Like, Hart has the capability of getting all the way to the rack or spotting up and letting one fly. Now, Brandon hit his first 3 threes of the season in that Minnesota game, but he's not a guy who's capable of shooting the same way that Hart can. You know what I mean? And so I don't know if it's going to come down to a decision between Ingram or Kuzma in the starting lineup. I really want both of them to work together, but they have to be better on the boards.
No, look, man. When we talked about red flags before the season started, or things that we were concerned about, what were the 2 major things? Like, it was defense and rebounding, which go hand in hand, right? Like, you do not end a defensive possession until you secure a defensive rebound. And even though Minnesota only had, I think 20 or 21 offensive rebounds, and like the Lakers, I think, were right there with them, like 18 or something like that. Minnesota was bullying them on the offensive glass, and that's going to matter.
And it's so deflating, Darius. It's so deflating. Like, several of those possessions, they actually played pretty good defense. And then, right, they don't secure the rebound. It's just so deflating, even for the players on the court. You can see the body language.
Yeah, look. So that starting lineup that we just discussed, they played 8 minutes together in the Minnesota game. They've only got 1 game in the NBA.com stats database right now. They had an offensive rating of 89.1. Okay. Woof. Right? Yeah. And a defensive rating of 140.6.
Jesus.
So you want to see more of that lineup? I want to see more of that lineup. Minnesota offered a couple of challenges. Jimmy Butler was amazing. We're not going to project off of a 1-game, 8-minute sample here. So I do want to see more of that lineup. What I will say, though, is that the Lonzo, Hart, LeBron, Kuzma, McGee lineup has 5 games together. They've played 50 minutes. Offensive rating of 111.2. Defensive rating of 101.6.
Yeah.
So I want to see more of that lineup, too.
And you can't have both, because one thing that plays into this is, I tweeted this at halftime, Ingram had that huge first half, not a single point shared when he shared the court.
Yes, I saw your tweet on that as well. Look, if I were to build a rotation, and we've either talked about this on the pod or offline, so you'll have to forgive the listeners, or you'll have to forgive us listeners if I'm repeating myself here. But look, I would totally start Lonzo, Ingram, LeBron, Kuzma, and McGee. But guess who my first guy to the bench is?
Harden for Ingram.
Yes. And it's not Rondo in for Lonzo. Because I want Ingram basically playing that Lance Stevenson role with the second unit. And if I have to marginalize Lance Stevenson to promote Brandon Ingram, sorry. You know what I mean?
Lance has been good. Lance has been good.
Look, Lance has been good. And Lance is also a 10-year veteran. And if he's going to sulk, sorry, man. You know, like I understand that there is this urgency to try to get things done now. I understand that we are hunting best lineups and the Lakers are 2-5 and they need to get things going. The premise of the piece that I wrote today, where I was discussing this sort of six-man core, is that the Lakers need to be more patient now, not less patient. The last thing anyone needs, from fans and all the way up to the players and the coaches, is pressing, because pressing quickly turns into panic. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so,
it's something like saying that we had to be patient in previous years. It was kind of toothless, right? Like there was no other option. There were no expectations. There was no or else.
Well, there was no payoff. There was no payoff
exactly.
from doing the opposite, right? Like there's no, you know, if they don't win, you know, tomorrow night, they're going to not make the playoffs. It's like they're not making the playoffs anyway, man. Right? For the last 3-4 years.
So there's no pressure that's on the opposite side of that patience.
That's right. Now, though, that there actually is pressure behind it, that now is the time to push back against that pressure, maintain the patience, and build within the context of a season. Not like so often we have talked about from like an analysis perspective of building for the long term. Right. And we've been talking about this within the framework of 2, 3, 4 years out. Like, what is the next great Lakers team going to be? And that is not a 1 season process. That's like a 3 or a 4 season process. In theory, now what I'm talking about is like scaling that down and building within the context of a season. And what are your goals when you're in games 70 and 75 and hopefully in games 85 and 90? You know what I mean? And that isn't saying, well, tonight we're going to go with Rajon Rondo and Lance Stevenson closing because they're hot. And so sorry, Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball, we're going to hunt this win right now on November 3rd. You know, like I get that mentality to try to stack wins, and I understand that there's a push and pull with that. But if you trust in the team that you've built, and I think Magic and Rob Pelinka, they need to do that at least for the first month and a half to 2 months of the season, that the coach needs to follow suit with that. I'm not going to sit here and smash on Luke Walton. I just think that he needs to figure out exactly who his core guys are and treat those guys like they're the core. Because when you start to expand your core guys to 8 and 9 players, I think that that's doing everyone a disservice.
So before I respond to Darius, I wanted to give a quick shout out to The Athletic for sponsoring the pod. If you haven't signed up yet, you can get 40% off of your first year at theathletic.com/LFR. Working on a piece right now about the Lakers transition game, and I'll be doing a piece right after that on the defensive end. So again, be sure to sign up. That's 40% off at theathletic.com/LFR. So let's talk about this idea of urgency, Darius. Part of my rationale for being totally okay with a guy like Rondo closing a game out instead of Lonzo if he's playing significantly better. And it has to be significantly better, which I think he did over the last 2 games. I just thought Lonzo was that bad, and I hope I don't have to preach my Lonzo fan bona fides, right? Like I am a big Lonzo Ball believer. I thought he was awful on that road trip. But part of my rationale for why I'm okay with that is because I do think the Lakers need to stack wins early in the season. I do think that Game 60 and Game 70 and all of that are important, and what they're building toward is important. I don't think that not closing with a guy who's having a terrible game sets them back all that much for that. And I do think that getting a W as opposed to a loss, and not like they did, right? They lost the games anyway.
Yes.
But I think that efforting toward a win that night is important in a conference that's as competitive as the West. You're fine with like sitting back and kind of like sticking with a longer term principle, even at the sake of possibly a win or two in the short term?
I am, because look, they haven't won anyway. This is basically a process versus results discussion that we're having here.
Right.
And so my counter to you right now is, well, then show me the results.
Sure. I mean, the decision can only be made in the moment. If there's 6 minutes left in a close game against Minnesota, and Lonzo hasn't done jack the whole night in 24 minutes.
I hear you, but they are building. The reason why I'm pushing back against this so hard is because they are not establishing anything within the context of this is what we're going to do night to night to night. It's like, to a certain extent, they are playing whack-a-mole with the lineup.
That's a great point.
So I'm talking about building towards something and saying, this is who we are. And not only this is who we are from a style and from a culture standpoint, this is who we are as a team. This is our hierarchy of players. This is how we're going to compete each night with these guys. And this is our group, right? Mm-hmm. So within the construct of a game even, you build your rotation that specific way. Now, we've been NBA fans for a long time. We've watched thousands upon thousands of games. You and I know, just as well as any head coach in the league, that there are going to be factors and variables that throw off your best laid plans, right? Brandon Ingram gets in foul trouble. Well, guess what? Okay, we got to go to this guy. Lonzo Ball has maybe had like 3 or 4 like defensive lapses. Okay, so like we're going to handle that accordingly and sit him down and have a conversation about, you know, getting his head in the game, or what were you seeing here, or where's it at today, right? Like that's what in-game coaching is about from like a total novice standpoint of me sitting on my couch right here, right? Like I'm not going to pretend that I'm an NBA coach. But I will say that night to night, what I'm talking about is building a consistency with this is our approach, this is how it's going to go. And right now it sort of feels like, okay, they're sort of flying by the seat of their pants a little bit. And you're hot tonight, okay, well, it's your turn. And I'm just not on board with that when you have this specific type of roster construction with this sort of mix of young player and veteran, and with this idea that you want to be a playoff team and this is where you want to go. And I feel like anything else in the NBA or at the professional sports level in general, outside of like just basketball, that it's about building habits, and habits just aren't the technical stuff that we see on the floor in terms of closeouts and defensive and offensive principles. It's habits within your lineup construction, within your rotation, with your minutes allocation, with all of that stuff. I think that none of it is going to be rote, and none of it is going to be this is how it's going to be every night regardless. What I hope for is searching for a certain consistency that they can use as the template, as a guide in order to optimize results.
I think you may have talked me into your perspective. The one thing that comes to mind, just digesting what you said there, is it's one thing if you have some stability in place and those longer term habits that you're talking about. It's one thing to pull a guy when he's not giving you squat on a night. And I want to be clear about Lonzo versus Rondo. Rondo has to be playing significantly better than Lonzo for me to be okay with sitting Lonzo. If it's close or Rondo's been a little bit better that night, you go with Lonzo. But there has not been any consistency. There's not been a norm established in the first place. And this may be the time to fight through those, 4.1 rebound on a night where Minnesota gets 20 offensive rebounds, not a single deflection or defensive play or anything like that. This may be the time to go through those pains. Those are the manifestations of the lack of continuity that currently exists. But by going through that now, it doesn't exist in game 30, game 35, and so on and so forth. in a way to where down the line, where if Lonzo gives you another night like that and Rondo's playing significantly better, you can do that without breaking the established culture, rotation, environment, all that stuff. You can do that without breaking it for that one night while you're hunting for a win. So I think you've talked me into it.
Yeah, I think that there's this idea, right? Like what you're talking about is like upsetting the apple cart. And I think right now there are no norms. The norm is LeBron James.
And even that's not normal, right? Like he's the norm, he's the centerpiece, the center of gravity and all that, but he's still not normal yet either.
No. Like, look, I thought it was funny when LeBron offered that comment, that little side comment about how, like, statistically he's almost always going to look good. I think in the first half against Minnesota, he was like 3 for 9, and it was sort of just like, LeBron, like, what's going on? And you know what LeBron's halftime stat line was? It was like 10, 5, and 5. You know what I mean? Like you multiply that by 2, and he has a 20-point triple-double.
No, man, you can write his numbers in pen. Like there's a bandwidth to him, but like
you can chisel it in stone, man.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that I get back to your point because I think it's a very good one. I'm not saying, 100% of the time, this guy, like, these are the 5 guys who need to be on the floor to close a game. That's not what I'm saying, because, look, there are plenty of times where you kind of do ride the hot hand to win. And, like, a specific lineup who maybe went on a run or looked good earlier that game, you give them another shot and then they're riding it out and you just let them finish. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I totally understand that. But those are typically the anomalies within an 82-game season. You know, where it's just like maybe that happens 8, 10, 12 times a year out of 82 games, right? So that means basically 70 other games you're probably choosing a closing lineup from that core 6 or 7 players. And what I'm saying is that the Lakers have only played 7 games, and they've had suspensions. So they're already a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of like this idea of consistency with a lineup. But in those 7 games, even though there were suspensions, Luke started the season with Rondo, KCP, Ingram, LeBron, JaVale. Then Hart got a start, right, over KCP. And then the suspensions happen. Lonzo plays well. When Rondo comes back, Lonzo stays in the starting lineup. Ingram comes back, and then Kuzma is starting in Ingram's place. Ingram comes back, Hart goes to the bench, and Ingram stays in the starting lineup. So already you can sort of see that Luke's not sure, man. He's just not sure. Like, these are all from that same core of players, but KCP and Rondo, to me, are sort of outside of those 6 guys that I mentioned. I think that KCP, Lance, and Rondo should basically be those 18 to 20 minute players. And that means that all of those other guys are basically like 28 to 32 minute players. And with JaVale being the only guy who falls below that because of the Lakers' ability to go small and their want to go small. And I just think you build a lineup with those sort of like markers in mind. Not like they're not drawn, those aren't lines in the sand, those aren't chiseled in stone the way that we were talking about LeBron's stat line earlier. But those are more like guidelines, like this is what we're hunting for. And you make this clear to the players. You have the relevant conversations that you're supposed to have. You build towards these specific rules. And if there's, a team plays 4 games in a week, or let's say that they play like 8 to 9 games every 2 weeks. If 1 or 2 of those nine games ends up being that like, oh, tonight Rondo played 24 or 26 minutes because he had it going, or Lance gets some extra burn for like the same reason, fine. But over the long haul, what we're trying to replicate over and over again is these are the guys, and we're going. This is the
continuity
guys.
We've established,
and this is what we're seeking.
That makes sense.
Every night.
Yeah,
and that's what I'd be looking for, and that's what I'm wanting, and we'll see if they get there. Luke has been notoriously slow in terms of, and I don't mean slow like dumb. I mean slow in terms of just like sorting all of this out within a season. And to be fair to Luke, his roster has turned over by 50% every single season. And so he is basically starting from scratch almost every year.
And those might not be the circumstances that he wants, but they're the ones that he has, and he needs to adjust to that accordingly. Like, it doesn't matter if it's not fair or the most ideal circumstances. They are the circumstances, and part of the reason is because you brought LeBron James in, right? So
every other coach wants this problem. Every other coach wants this problem, except for Steve Kerr.
So I have one last question for you. Is the Lakers had 24 five-man groups in the Minnesota game. And over the course of the last several games, for most of the season so far, Luke has been subbing guys out quicker on shorter shifts in an effort to play with pace and to tire out opponents, have guys, hey, give me your best 5-6 minute shift, come out for a couple minutes, you'll be right back in, but give me your best for a shorter period of time. What have you thought of that?
You know, going into the season, I actually thought that was the best way to play. But seeing it play out now over the first 10 or 11 days of the season, I'm starting to wonder if it's impacting guys' ability to get a good feel for the game.
I totally agree. I think that it's something that it plays into the whole idea of continuity too, right? Because it's not just like one player's rhythm and feel. It's the feel of a five-man unit, right? Like if you're out there with 3 shooters and a guy like JaVale who can finish above the rim, that's different just feel-wise on the court from being out there with Lance and with, Jonathan Williams, and 24 lineups in 48 minutes is a lineup every other minute. So like even not just individually, but as a team, I think that's true too. But please continue.
Yeah, no, like you were making the point for me right there. That's like exactly what I was going to say. And also too, like, look, man, like, I don't know like how big of a deal this is, or maybe I'm like overstating this, but a lot of these guys have been NBA rotation players in their career. And being an NBA rotation player typically means like you get these 6 to 8 minute shifts and sometimes longer. I remember Kevin Durant sort of had, I don't think it was like a beef with Steve Kerr, but I believe I read somewhere that last season, at least, that Durant was pretty adamant, and he's been pretty adamant throughout his career, that he likes to play the entire first quarter. He just likes to play the whole first quarter. So that's a 12-minute shift. I think Rondo got like a pretty long shift like that in the second half against the Timberwolves.
Yeah, he came in at like 6:51 and never came out again. And that'll happen sometimes if
a player is particularly hot. Normally I feel like that happens with like a star player or like a really good scorer or a really important defensive player.
And like Rondo was better than Lonzo, but I did not think he was particularly good or 18, 19 minute shift worthy.
I mean, look, Rondo is what he is. I'm not going to complain about Rajon Rondo.
Right, we knew what we were getting.
I think that he's played perfectly well throughout the season. If Lonzo was more like Drew Holiday, I guess, I'd say play them both together the way that the Pelicans did last season. But that's not the case. If they're going to share the court, maybe it can be for 4 minutes a night. Maybe. I think that there's maybe an opportunity for like a short shift each half where there is overlap with those guys and like you build a rotation that way, probably at some point late in the first quarter and late in the third quarter. If I was building the lineup, I would probably give Ingram the shortest shift to start the game at like 6-7 minutes, and then I'd bring in Hart, and then I'd bring Ingram back probably at the start of the second quarter.
Yeah, to me, he comes in for LeBron.
And I'd let LeBron play the whole first quarter if that's what he's after. Maybe bring him out at like the 10-minute mark so he gets that extra bit of rest that comes from a quarter break.
Sounds good to me. All right, I'll let Luke know next time I see him.
Yeah, just tell him, my podcast partner Darius, he has some great ideas for you.
I'll do that for sure.
Yeah.
Just as a teaser for a future pod, I want to talk to you on a future show about LeBron's effort level on the defensive end.
Oh, do you?
But that is I do. But that is a discussion for another time. That'll do it for this one. You've been listening to Laker Film Room Podcast, and we will catch you guys next time.